Did you know that Virginia is the birthplace of American whiskey? Well, they've been making it there since 1607, and Catoctin Creek has been honoring that tradition of small craft rye whiskey since 2009. Virginia grain, Virginia water, and Virginia barrels. Catoctin Creek, the Virginia rye whiskey. This is brought to you by Smooth Ambler, a proud member of the Bourbon Pursuit family. Smooth Ambler builds on the traditional roots of American whiskey through innovative blends, proudly sourced whiskeys, and a unique line of their own homemade bourbon and rye recipes made in West Virginia. So venture off the traditional trail and go see them in Maxwellton, West Virginia. They'd love to welcome you to the family that they're building around their whiskey. Wilderness Trail is sweet mash Kentucky straight bourbon and rye whiskey, made by Master Distiller Shane Baker and fermentation expert Dr. Pat Heist. Whether it is high rye or wheated, cask strength or bottled in bond, Wilderness Trail is always non-chill filtered premium whiskey with unparalleled flavor. Distilled, aged, and bottled in Danville, Kentucky. Don't screw up. That's the goal.
Exactly.
I'm sure that's Joe. That's what Joe would want to hear.
The train is on the tracks moving forward. It is not my job to slow it down. So.
Hey everyone, it's episode 316 of Bourbon Pursuit, the podcast featuring news, reviews, and interviews with people making the bourbon whiskey industry happen. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny Coleman, and before we start today's episode, talking to Dan McKee from Michter's, here's your weekly bourbon news update. A lawsuit challenging Rhode Island's ban on national direct-to-consumer alcohol sales has survived a big procedural challenge. U.S. District Judge John McConnell Jr. on last Friday rejected the state's attempt to get the case thrown out for a lack of standing. The suit was filed back in 2019 and argues that the prohibition of out-of-state companies shipping booze directly to Rhode Island residents without first stopping at a wholesaler or a local retailer is an unconstitutional infringement on interstate commerce. There's a big problem with distillation right now, and that's the stillage or the byproduct waste. You've probably heard about distilleries giving it to farmers to feed their cows, but there's a new problem on the horizon, and that's there's too much stillage. And now Kentuckians are encouraged to submit proposals for projects that will expand the use of bourbon distilling byproduct for a competition at the Distiller Grains Symposium on October 25th. 5 winners will be selected, and they will present to an audience of distillers and industry stakeholders, and the applicants must submit their proposals by August 30th at bourbonreversepitch.com. The Kentucky Distillers Association has announced that Log Still Distillery from Wally Dant that we discussed on a previous roundtable is the newest and 44th member of the Craft Trail. Cousins J.W. Wally Dant III, Lynn Dant, and Charles Dant are building Log Still Distillery as an expansive distilling and tourism experience on the site of the former Dant and Head Distillery that had been shut down since 1961. The $36 million project will feature a 20,000 square foot distillery, a tasting room with a 50-gallon hybrid still, a farm-to-table restaurant, a 12-acre lake, an outdoor amphitheater, a 22,000 square foot event center, 4 unique lodging options, private train depot, wooded walking trails, and a whole lot more. Now moving on to some Bourbon Release news, even though there's really not much, but we just want to let you know that we have another friendly reminder that Pursuit United will be hitting retail shelves very soon, likely this week and next week in Colorado, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Texas, as well as online at sealbox.com. This is the bourbon that Ryan and I have put our hearts into. It's a blend of 3 different states, bottled at 108 proof, non-chill filtered, and has a retail price of $65. We've had the opportunity to interview lots of great people from Michter's, such as the Master of Maturation, Andrea Wilson, the head honcho himself, Joseph Magliocco, and their former Master Distiller Pam Heilmann. Pam retired back in April 2019, and someone new stepped in for the role. Dan McKee worked alongside Pam at Beam for many years, and his pedigree of industry knowledge sure does show. We talk about selecting barrels for the 20 and 25-year-old Michter's releases, and learn a little bit more about their everyday products too. Barrel Bourbon is known for their expertise in crafting unique blends, taking lots of different whiskey from different regions and bottling it at cask strength. And you can even buy them online. Just visit barrelbourbon.com and click the Buy Now button. With that, Enjoy today's episode, and now here's Fred Minnick with Above the Char.
I'm Fred Minnick, and this is Above the Char. This week's idea comes from longtime listener Don Knott on Twitter, who writes me in April, how to act with your local store owner. Listen, if you covet relationships, if you value that store pick, if you value getting in first of line for those limited edition small batches or whatever they might be, then you need to have a relationship with your local store owner. That is absolutely paramount to your bourbon journey. I do not think that people who walk into a store and say, "Hey, you got any Blanton's? Hey, you got any Pappy? What about some E.H. Taylor? You got any of that?" I don't think those guys are the favorites of local store owners. Now, that being said, local stores are having a much more difficult time getting allocated products because the chains and the online stores are beginning to command the vast majority of them. But the local independent store owner still has a lot of power, especially when it comes to barrel picks. I know here in Louisville, Kentucky, Westport Whiskey and Wine and Old Town Liquors, two of the best places in town to go get barrel picks. And I get barrel picks from there all the time. I'm not going in there to buy Regular's Maker's Mark. I'm getting their barrel picks. To be honest with you, that is the value of the independent liquor store, is their unique palates, their individual palates, and they have relationships that they do cash in on for their barrel picks. So that being said, have a good relationship with them. I do know people who know their kids' birthdays. They go as far as sending like Christmas cards. I mean, the store owner consumer relationship in bourbon, it's serious, and you really should treat them, kind of like my wife treats her hairdresser. Like, she's had the same hairdresser for 10 years and she buys her presents. I'm like, why are you buying her presents? She's like, because nobody does my hair like her. I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. And so that's the best way I can put it for you, Don, is to take care of the store that's taking care of you. That means buy from there frequently, buy their barrel picks, buy as much as you can from their stores. But like I was saying, I buy all my wine from Westport Whiskey and Wine. I get barrel picks from Old Town. Like, you got to be buying in these stores to get any rewards out of it. But that's going to do it for this week, folks. I appreciate you tuning in. Be safe out there. No licking handrails or trash cans. Remember, vodka sucks unless it's being used for hand sanitizer. Cheers, everybody.
Welcome back to another episode of Bourbon Pursuit, the official podcast of bourbon. The whole gang here today doing things remote through a great platform we use plenty of times. But today on the show, we've got somebody that, honestly, we have talked about Michter's time and time again. We have had people from Michter's on, but I started looking back at our recording calendar and I was like, we haven't had anybody from Michter's on in like almost 2 years now. So I said, this is prime time. We get somebody in to kind of give an inside scoop about what's been going on with the company, what's going on with products and everything like that. And I know that, Fred, you've had a lot of good runs with Michter's recently. I mean, you sent a bottle of Celebration to Ludacris. I mean, that's ludicrous.
Yeah, I mean, it was really quite fascinating to see like how well received that was from Ludacris' side, because he's actually like a Michter's fan, and when you go after these big celebrities, you have to have some big guns to get them sometimes, and that was definitely well received. I did not anticipate him drinking it straight from the bottle, and that thing's going from anywhere between $5,000 and $15,000, depending on who's selling it and what auction it is. But I was amazed. And then he was washing down like probably $12 chili with Michter's Celebration. It was definitely gold.
It's a great pairing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, Ryan, do you have any Michter's and chili pairings that you usually go with?
Nope. I just, I'm pretty standard. Look forward to my toasted releases and, 10 years. That's about all I can afford. So,
it is funny. Like, toasted is like one of all those secondary barrel finishes that are like going into like the new oak. I think toasted is my favorite. I really do like that.
And they were one of the first to do it too. I remember it was like in 2014. I was like,
yeah, I was them and like Woodford came out about the same time.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think we'll get into start talking about toasted because I think we have seen a toasted craze starting to happen here within the past year or two, where it seems that everybody's putting out some sort of toasted release. So
Yeah.
we'll see if they were on the forefront of it. But let's go ahead and introduce our guest today. So today on the show, we have Dan McKee. Dan is the master distiller over at Michter. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Excited.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're here. So we usually like to start the show off with some sort of icebreaker to let people know a little bit more about you. So Dan, here's yours. Whether you were growing up or whether it's now, have you had what's the funniest or non-typical animal that you've ever owned as a pet?
I'm pretty traditional with the cats when we were younger and dogs. But I think it's the dogs that they're just goofy. The ones that we own, miniature dachshunds. They always they're ferocious and funny at the same time. So
Oh,
Those are the wiener dogs,
dachshund-
right?
The wiener dogs, right?
Yeah. They're always up to no good, trying to do something mischievous, and you always know when something's up when they run out of the room very fast. They have something in their mouth.
Ryan or Fred, do you have any odd pets growing up or anything like that?
I got a pretty good story for you, actually. We had, I used to have lizards. Like I would have all sorts of lizards. I grew up raising farm animals. Like I had pigs, sheep, horses. The only thing I didn't have, I even had goats. I mean, the only thing I didn't have growing up was cattle because they were so expensive and you needed they always got eaten by coyotes or something and where I was from. But
They're a little bit bigger than a chicken too.
A little bit bigger than a chicken. But we had lizards. Like I would get exotic lizards, and one of them I got was we called it a swamp lizard, but it was actually kind of like a miniature alligator, and the thing was just wreaking havoc on the house. Like it kept escaping. And it was not peculiar for our lizards to escape. We had an iguana escape, but they always came back for some reason. And probably because the birds and hawks and so forth would, they were about to eat them. But we had a swamp lizard, and we were just fed up with this thing. It shit all over the house. It got out everywhere. It got into the cereal. I mean, it was just it was a very odd lizard. And so we're like, let's sell it. And this was, of course, before the internet. So we put an ad in the newspaper to sell this thing. And we got the weirdest messages. Like this is back, Ryan, when you had little cassettes for your answering machine, and you'd come home, you'd see a little red blinking light, you'd press it, and this is part of my family's every time we get together, we share this story. But this guy calls up, I'm calling about that swamp blizzard. I just want to know what it. I mean, the guy was talking about he wanted to eat it. It was he was definitely Cajun. And, living in Oklahoma City, and suffice it to say, we didn't sell it to him. And the lizard got out not too long after that, and it was the winter, so we assume it froze to death outside.
Fred, did you let the lizard walk around the house?
Yeah, we'd let him hang out and everything. We actually we outfitted our fireplace to be kind of like a sanctuary, and the top of it was the chimney was closed off, so that area they couldn't get out in. So they had all this room to run and everything. And then we would let them out, and then, probably not the best idea, but I loved having lizards. They were incredible pets.
Yeah.
Except that swamp lizard.
Or bark.
Exactly.
And you'll have to feed them like crickets. That was the thing.
Yeah. Real easy.
So let's go ahead and we'll dive into today's topic. So I kind of want to start off with an easy one for Dan, because I got to kind of know what the easiest job in the world comes to when it comes to releasing Michter's 20 and Michter's 25 every year, because the whole world goes crazy for it. But I could imagine, at least for me personally, tasting through these barrels, are there actually some bad ones, or every once in a while you're like, okay, we'll get rid of this one? Or I mean, is it all just all gravy every time when you taste these barrels?
I wish it was gravy. No, but it is a lot of fun. Not every barrel comes out, as expected, but that's where, I'm very fortunate to work with Andrea Wilson, our master of maturation, and the team. We have, a great team here, and the work that's involved, the data collection and so forth. So, when we're going in and pulling those barrels, we have a great idea of where they're at from continuous monitoring. So, but yeah, you do come across ones that you try to figure out what may have occurred there. But with the stocks that we have, we're very proud of them. As you've had the 2025 year, they're great whiskeys, but yeah, it's a lot of fun to be a part of these older whiskeys.
Yeah, I would imagine. Okay, go ahead. How many barrels you got left of it?
That's exactly what I was writing down, Kenny.
One thing we're going to find out today is I love my job, and Michter's has been great to me. So there's a lot of things I may not be able to speak about today, but it's something that they're allocated, of course, and there'll be limited releases throughout the future, and we don't want to overdo it. Want it to be special, and want to bring these great whiskeys to the consumer and to be enjoyed. So I think there's something special about that.
Kenny, in Dan's defense of answering that question regarding how many barrels are left, I have been trying to pry information out of Michter's for 15 years, and there has never been there's never been a door more sealed tight than the Michter's team. With they keep a pretty pretty good ship with that loose lips sink ships kind of philosophy, and that they don't share too many details about the whiskey. But one thing we have seen year in year out is the whiskey's pretty damn good, especially those older releases. I'll say that there's a lot, and Lou Bryson just recently wrote an article about this for the Daily Beast about like stop spending your money on older whiskey. And I think for the large part that's true, but Michter's time and time again puts out older releases that don't taste like a fence post. They're not over oak. They're really good. And so, Dan, I want to come to you back to those older releases. What is y'all's process, for choosing these? Because again, you get a lot of people with 25-year-old bourbon on their hands, and it's going to taste off. And y'all's always taste spot on.
Well, first, I think just when you're tasting these older whiskeys, you really have to think outside the box, open up to the experience that you're in hand. Obviously, these are going to be way different than those 10, 12-year-old whiskeys that a lot of people truly enjoy. We do kind of have that house profile we're looking, the 20-year, you get a lot of that, whether it's black cherry, the 25, those, whether it's dark toffees, things like that. But neither one of them are over oaked, woody, wood bombs, things like that. They're never that. And I think that's something special. But there is a consistency we're looking for, from each release. We know it's going to be, a little different. You're going to have different variances. But is it rich, complex, great mouthfeel, things we're looking for, a nice finish? And again, like you said, nobody wants to just feel like they're biting into tree bark or medicinal, things like that. So if a barrel ever did come across like that, we're not afraid of rejecting it just because it's been aging and we've spent all the time and resources into aging that barrel. We won't release unless it's ready and fits the profile. And I think that's something special. And that goes through all of our products, whether it's our US 1 line, our 10-year marks and so forth. It's just not going to be released if it doesn't fit our standards.
Yeah, and I think one question that kind of precedes this a little bit is, when you are trying to figure out the flavor profiles in it, like kind of talk about your palate training, or what did you do growing up in the industry to be able to prepare you to be able to say like, oh, okay, we're going to take care of 20, 25-year-old releases, and how you got involved in that process too.
So when I joined Michter's 6 years ago as a distillery manager, and we were entering into phase 3 with the construction of our Shively distillery and so forth, I had a great opportunity. I was working with Master Distiller Willie Pratt and our distiller Pam Heilmann, again Andrea Wilson, and so that's the experience just with those 3 individuals. I mean, it's amazing. So kind of coming in and then learning about Michter's, and someone asked me about what will you remember about Willie, and I remember sitting in his office and having conversations, and he loved tasting whiskey. And I remember the first time he pulled out a whiskey that was a little over 30 years, and I got to try it, and I'd never experienced something like that before. And at that moment, I didn't have words for it because it was amazing, but it was completely different than anything that I had experienced before. So having whiskeys growing up like in your 20s and, experiencing it for different reasons. And then as I'm getting older, you're starting to drink whiskey and really, really enjoying the flavors and the experience it offers. And then coming to Michter's and actually just a wide, we have so many different expressions with different profiles. And then just kind of learning that way and hearing the experiences from people like Willie and Pam Heilmann and so forth. And I think that's really helped. And again, I always talk about each expression has a profile that we want to stay true to. And just adding, you'll always hear, even if you had 4 barrels, barrel one may go well with 4, but it doesn't blend well with 3 or things like that. So those are interesting things to work with. The chemistry makeups are different, but it also, that's the art of it and bringing it together. Science and art, and that's whiskey making. And it's, I'm very fortunate to be in this position. It's a lot of fun to experience it.
Absolutely. And you got your start at Jim Beam, right? With Andrea, is that correct?
With Pam,
Or
Pam
Pam, sorry.
Heilmann. Yeah.
Yes, Pam, I'm sorry. Yes, what was it like working under her at Jim Beam and the difference being at Michter's? What were the processes? One's a behemoth, one's kind of starting out. What's the difference there?
Well, it was a great experience. When I first hired on at Jim Beam, I started out as a distillery operator at the Jim Beam Claremont Distillery for a couple of years there. And talk about a great job. I mean, just making whiskey hands-on, being a part of it. There's the good times and bad times when you're cleaning up messes and grain. And that was a good experience. And then a couple of years later, I had the opportunity to promote to a distillery supervisor at the Booker No Distillery in Boston, Kentucky. And that's where I joined with Pam Heilmann. I was always on third shift, so I would stay into the morning when Pam, as the distillery manager, would come in and you learn a lot. I was very fortunate working at Jim Beam because you work with such great people that had 10 years all the way to 40 years of experience. So, that's experience that you can't buy in a textbook. And again, I always cherish those moments when I was at Jim Beam. And yeah, the volume itself. I mean, the team made a lot of whiskey, and then you come to Michter's, which kind of like a mid-sized distillery. Our volume's much less, but we're doing those same things. Quality is important at all distilleries, and Michter's has a cost be damn approach towards quality, which is truly amazing. I mean, I can call our president, Joe Magliocco, and if we have a idea that even if it costs more, less efficient, but it'll improve the experience in the whiskey, it's something we're willing to try. And I think that's what's amazing coming to Michter's.
And one of the things that kind of sets you all apart from the industry is your barrel entry proof, going in at 103 barrel entry proof, and I think that's pretty common knowledge. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was the yeast. Like, so you all are now in that phase where you all are making your own whiskey. You went from the where you were sourcing to when you were contract distilling. Now you're making your own whiskey. What can you tell us about the yeast? Are you all propagating, or is it dry yeast? Or give us some background on the yeast you're using.
Yeah, sorry, that's one of those topics we don't discuss too much about our yeast program. And I know
we'll just shut it all down.
Yeah, I know it is very exciting.
Well, see, I set that up, Dan, because I thought that was one of them you could talk about.
No, yeast, kind of the mash bill percentages, things like that. But no, what I will say is, we do have a yeast program here. And you mentioned in phase 1 where we went out and, purchased matured stocks that we wanted to emulate. Phase 2, we went to another distillery here in Kentucky, and they produced to our specifications. And what I can say is we're using those same yeast as we go into, here in phase 3, so that our whiskeys will have a transition and be those same high quality whiskeys.
How long has phase 3 been going on for now?
So the Shively Distillery, we opened in 2012 as far as bottling and processing and so forth. The larger stills at the Shively Distillery came online in August of 2015.
So we're getting close to a release time that's going to be part of this, or is it starting to now start blend in?
So, with, let's say, our US 1 line, that's another great thing. Again, we're a privately owned company. We can do a lot of things that maybe larger distilleries may not. But we do release on a taste profile and not an age statement. Our, a typical or average whiskey between 5 and 7 years. So those barrels now are getting of age of over 5 years, and as we deem them ready, they'll start to transition in.
I remember that time when you all were setting up, and then you had the collapses at Fort Nelson, which is now set. But that was a rough go. I remember when the Shively distillery was getting set up, and the department would come in and say, you need to move your auger or something wherever the grains were coming in. You need to move that over 2 inches. I felt like in that early phase, there's like Michter's couldn't catch a break. They had the issues with like the Fort Nelson building. Those have been pretty well documented. They've got it fixed now, but they started working on that in 2010 or even before that, I think. And then, Shively. But once they got humming, man, that Shively distillery is beautiful. The Fort Nelson distillery, I think that's got the best distillery bar there is, especially when it comes to cocktails. And it just, things are finally humming for you all, Dan.
Yeah, it's, like I said, when I started here, I was what we call the working distillery manager, and it was exciting. The distillery itself was under construction with, again, Willie Pratt and Pam Heilmann overseeing it, and then I joined to help. And some of the vessels were already set, so I was there before the mechanical, the electrical, and all of that was, and the granary was even built. So I saw it from all the nuts and bolts from start to finish, and just to be a part of that. But yeah, we did have a lot of little quirks, little startup issues. But every distillery goes through that when they're starting up. But now we're very proud of it. Our distillation system, 100% copper. We have a 46-foot tall, 32-inch diameter continuous column still to a doubler pot still. There's over 11,000 pounds of copper in the system. It just makes for a very nice, when I say clean but flavorful distillate. We're very proud of the distillate. It has some fruitiness to it, nice oily mouthfeel. And yeah, it's, from those first days that we were testing off the stills, I mean, that was one of the proudest moments, just to see everybody's face when we actually, we made the mash, we fermented it and sent it to the beer still. And we've been going on. It's, like a year later, it was determined we needed to expand, and we added some more fermenters, and eventually here soon we'll add a few more fermenters for continued growth. So yeah, it's pretty exciting here.
Isn't that the problem? You feel like you can never make enough.
I wouldn't say a problem, but it's challenging. It's exciting for our industry, for everybody. I mean, to see all distilleries expand, it's I think that's a great thing.
I want to pick your brain on blending just for a second. So you talked about like US 1 and being a blend of 5 to 7 year old whiskeys. So going into it, do you all have like a set formula, like knowing, okay, based on years past, we know that X amount of 5-year barrels to X amount of 7-year barrels from these places in the warehouse are probably going to give us, that profile that we're looking for US 1. What's the process of blending different whiskeys at different ages from different places of the warehouse?
Spirits of French Lick exploded onto the distilling scene early in 2016 as Indiana's largest double pot still distillery. They employ old world sentiment with new world attitudes, delivering the finest handcrafted bottle and bond bourbons to an audience eager for an alternative to the big guys. And their distiller, Alan Bishop, uses historic Hoosier yeast strains, alternative grains, and 53-gallon number 2 char barrels to bring you spirits with unparalleled quality and depth of flavor. You can find all Spirits of French Lick's products and new releases on sealbox.com. But don't just take Fred Minnick's word for it. Find out for yourself. Check out spiritsoffrenchlick.com and follow them on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And remember, always drink responsibly. Total Wine & More is ready for summer. They've got all your pours for the great outdoors, like their top 12 wines under $15. And raise a glass to America with a star-spangled selections of sips made in the USA. and beat the heat with refreshing bourbon cocktails. Why not mix it up and serve a brown derby or a peachy keen at your next barbecue? Then taste your way to a new flavorant, like ready-to-freeze cocktail pops and fun fizzy hard seltzers. Lime, pineapple, and peach, anyone? So no matter if you're grilling, chilling, or both, you're sure to find cool prices on over 8,000 wines, 4,000 spirits, and 2,500 beers, in-store or TotalWine.com. Heaven Hill Distillery just launched a 3D behind-the-scenes tour of their Bernheim distillery, the largest independent family-owned bourbon distillery in the world. See for yourself how they produce 1,553-gallon barrels of new make whiskey per day before it makes its way to the barrel for aging. From grain trucks to copper stills, drop into this 3D experience at heavenhilldistillery.com and navigate your way around the distillery for a step-by-step look at how they crafted their award-winning lineup of American whiskeys. Heaven Hill reminds you, think wisely, drink wisely. Cheers.
What's the process of blending different whiskeys at different ages from different places of the warehouse?
So there are protocols. I mean, this is the great part of working with, again, Andrea Wilson, our master of maturation, and her overseeing that. But as far as our small batch, our US1 Kentucky Straight Bourbon, our small batches are truly small. They're the equivalent of 20 full barrels. That's all our equipment can handle. So again, you have to have very high quality, consistent barrels to do that. And we have flavor profiles. So as those barrels, whether they're 5 to 7, we have been monitoring them, doing tasting, doing the scientific lab testing on them. So we understand what they're offering. And yeah, there is protocols to bring from different areas to establish it. There's times, though, that we can put for testing before we go full scale, you'll bring in those barrels and determine that it's not the Michter's house style for our US1 bourbon, and so then we go back to the drawing board. But yeah, there's definitely those protocols set in place where to pull, and as you guys well know, at different parts of the warehouse and age a little different. But that's one thing that we've also are doing really well at. Our warehouses are they're not the traditional non-heated warehouses. We do heat cycling here. They're only four floors high, so there's a consistency there. It kind of reduces those variances from maybe the very tall warehouses that you'll see on the countryside.
I think an interesting anecdote there was the fact that you said only 20 barrels go into a small batch. And as most of our listeners know, that the term small batch doesn't actually mean anything. There's nothing that's designated for it or anything like that. However, when you even think of, since there is no designation, it could be up to 300 barrels that go into a quote unquote small batch. And hearing you only do 20, just to kind of put it in perspective to a lot of people, like that's on average, maybe somewhere after you get cut with water, maybe somewhere between 4,500 to 5,500 bottles out of 20 barrels that you're going to get into it. So it's surprisingly a lot smaller than what I would have thought that you all would be doing into a batch.
Yeah, it's something that was started early on. Like I said, every distillery is about quality, but here at Michter's, we do a lot of things that, support that. It's not just me saying it. And, that was one of it. Our products are either single barrel or truly small batch. And that was something that was established early on. And as we continue to grow, we have shown no signs of changing that. It's something we're very proud of. Yeah, by only going 20 full barrels, it reduces that opportunity to kind of introduce maybe some subpar barrels. There are distilleries that do over 500, even over 1,000 barrel batches. So it's something that we are very proud of.
Was that the case at your former job? And is it easier for you to, to blend those bigger batches than the smaller ones?
I won't speak to whether it's easy or not, or what my previous employer was doing, but I will just say for us, it is challenging. I mean, again, you do come across barrels that may not have aged to the expectation, and that's something that is, let's say, our processing operators, they're doing sensory and all the quality checks on the incoming barrels, and there are cases where we have to reject matured barrels and actually send them from our facility to be repurposed into fuel ethanol. And It's the same with our distillate. If we unfortunately have a batch that didn't maybe ferment well, or it doesn't fall within our standards, we actually reject it. And, it's painful to have to call the owner and let them know that we rejected a batch, but it's something that we know if the distillate's not right at the beginning, it's not going to be right at the end, and we're not going to force it. It truly ultimately is about bringing that best American whiskey to the consumer and enjoying it. And you have to have that consistency and great whiskey.
For sure. I kind of had a question about your sort of career path here too. With Pam moving on to retirement and them looking for a new successor, did you think that you were going to be next in line, or was there an interview process? Like, how did that all happen, and what was the transition like for you as well?
Yeah, so my journey to Master Distiller was, I'd say, interesting to say the least. If you go back to the start of my career in the industry as a distillery operator, I don't think that thought ever came into my mind, and in fact, I know it didn't. And when I had the opportunity to come to Michter's, again, Willie Pratt was our master distiller at the time, and things were going very well, but he decided to retire. Pam assumed the master distiller role, and all intents and purposes, I thought that would have gone longer than it did. And yeah, at some point when you were interviewed, and Michter's is always, we're looking to the future, so there was a process there. And when I was offered the opportunity, it was very rewarding, and it's who doesn't want to be the master distiller? So I'm very excited.
I don't. I do not want to be a master distiller.
No,
No way.
I'm very humble about it. It's an opportunity that 15 years ago I would have never have seen, and here we are, and doing things like this, and going out into market and meeting such great people. I mean, the consumer, bartenders, bar, restaurant, store owners, things like that. I've met so many great people, and the passion that's out there is amazing. That's something from year one that I wouldn't have known until, most recently. And just to see the excitement that the bourbon whiskey industry generates, it is exciting. I know I use that a lot, but it is very rewarding, very exciting.
Do you think that's the weirdest part about the transition, is actually having to go and be a speaking figure rather than always turning dials and knobs all day?
I will say again, it's a lot of fun, but like doing something like this is very hard for me. I always kind of say I'm a production guy, and that's where my comfort level's at. Doing stuff like this, there's a lot of ums and trying to think about what to say next. But this is one of the more difficult parts of it.
Yeah, we're here to put the pressure on you.
Yeah.
One of the things about Michter's is that you all have kind of taken like an old school approach with your titles in your job roles. If you go back to the 1950s, the master distiller didn't do things with the barrels. They just kind of they put the whiskey in the barrel. They did the fermentation. They put the whiskey in the barrel, and they left it to the warehouse managers. They might go back and taste and everything, and they might choose what the product was. But they didn't really focus on the warehouses. You have a very distinct role, and Andrea Wilson has a very distinct role. I'm curious as to what is your involvement in the warehouse and the maturation. In is there some overlap there, or do you just put it in the barrel and you're out?
I am definitely responsible for the front end part of it, bringing the grains in, the mashing, fermentation, distillation, and passing all the QC checks, entering it into the barrel, and then Andrea she's overseeing that maturation process. But there is definitely a lot of overlapping. I mean, just let's say, for example, a year into distillate's been into the barrel for a year, we're already pulling samples, we're tasting as a team, we're, creating data, and that goes on through the lifetime of those barrels. And then with whether it's using different types of barrels, I'm in on the process, making decisions. There's the voice there that contributes, and then of course when it comes time to release and bringing different barrels together, I'm a part of that, and then ultimately making the decision when what's ready to be released.
I have a question about that too, because I remember when we interviewed Pam, and she had done all of her tasting in the morning. It's now 10 a.m. as the time we're actually recording this. Have you already done tastings for the day, or are you more of an afternoon person?
I typically in the morning, so I didn't today because of preparing for this, of course. But no, typically a day would be coming in, walking around the department, seeing how everyone is, seeing how production is going, and then also it gives the distillery time to get samples and things like that. But whether it's tasting the new distillate, the distillery's already been running, so I can taste distillate off the stills, and then also the production from the day before. As it's going through its QC, we do our sensory panel here. We have over 25 employees that are trained to approve new distillate. We have the GC mass spec to do chemical analysis, and it has to pass both of them before it can be approved. If, as I mentioned before, if one of those is off, let's say the sensory picks up on something that the GC didn't, we'll actually fail it and then send it out of here to be repurposed into ethanol. But that's an important. And then once it passes, we give the warehouse the green light to go ahead and cut that distillate to a much lower proof. As Fred mentioned, we go in the barrels at 103 proof, which is the lowest entry proof of any distillery of scale, and that's for all of our products. That's very important for us to do that, and it's very expensive. It causes us to use more barrels, but again, it dissolves those sugars more readily. It helps create that nice smoothness that's associated with Michters, and it's something that we do. But yeah, it's going around. I typically taste in the morning, but truthfully, all day long, it doesn't matter. It's when it's available, when time allows. But usually with the distillate, it's in the morning.
And I did have a question about one of your releases, because it's only happened, I think, on rare occasions, is you all putting out a barrel proof expression. And knowing, and I don't have any bottles or anything like that, but I don't know what like the final proof it ended up being. But going in at a lower proof of 103, and depending on where you're pulling these barrels from, what sort of variations do you see in barrel proof expressions or barrel proof sampling and everything like that that's coming out and tasting?
So as we go in at 103, we see a lot of our barrels come out around 108 to 112, 110 being kind of the average. I think for 2020, we did the toasted barrel finish rye, and the average ABV on that was 54.6. So, that's right in line with what we typically see. Sometimes you'll see some barrel proofs up around 114, but, right at that 110, 112 is what we see. And if you think about it, it's, that's another thing that we always speak of, and how it really makes our whiskeys great is when we go in at that lower, you have that chemical reaction that, again, that we prefer. But as it comes out, we're adding more water up front, but you take someone that went into the barrel at a much higher proof, they're going to come out a lot higher, and they're having to add about 50% more water to get it to bottling proof. So, at least the water at the front end has those characteristics of the maturation process, and again, creates that nice, real rich, flavorful whiskey that we have.
Do you think lower entry proofs, they obviously taste greater at a younger age? Do you think they can hold up to age as it matures? Because it seems like to me the distilleries that do have those high entry proofs, it takes them a long time to get where you want them, but once they get there, they're very good and they age well. But I'm not sure about the lower entry proof because we really haven't had a ton, until recently.
There's so many factors, just like everything. But yes, the low barrel entry proof will do fine as it ages. But it's like anything. How was it made? How is it aged? The barrels it's aged, we use new toasted charred American white oak barrels. I mean, talk about maximum flavor extraction with that toasting and then charring. So, but again, that's why we go into the warehouse and we're continuously collecting data as the barrels mature. We even have a program that we have stainless steel drums that if we see that a barrel is kind of, whether it's at its best, it may start to plateau, and we want to stop that. And we have that opportunity to put that in a stainless steel drum to stop the aging process. But yeah, very much so. Low entry proof will do just fine.
And of course, you got the heat cycled warehouses. That plays a little bit of a role in what you all got cooking.
Yeah, I mean, Kentucky is one of the best places in the world to age whiskey, and the changing of the seasons and heating up, and that whiskey inside that barrel, as it warms up, the pressure inside increases. It drives that whiskey into the capillaries of the wood. And then when it cools down, that whiskey's coming back out, extracting those flavors. And over a course of a year, we say there's about 4 to 6 natural cycles where it's heating up, cooling down. Well, over the winter here in Kentucky, when the temperature's at a lull, we go ahead and heat up the warehouse. We see a certain temperature change, and then eventually we'll stop the heat. We'll open the louvers and windows and let it naturally cool down, and we've caused a cycle. Now, again, you can't put it on the label, but our data, our experiences show that we're probably adding 6 months for each year that we heat cycle. And, again, that's the art of it. The color extraction, the flavor, all of that is, mouthfeel. It's impacted by that additional heat cycling. Not many distilleries do it. It's very expensive. We lose a lot of angel share. I think a traditional non-heated warehouse is somewhere around 2.5% angel share, and we're upwards around 4%. So it's definitely an art of managing the barrels and so forth.
So another question I kind of want to pose is, as we kind of start rounding this out a little bit, is one of the last offerings, and I think Ryan hinted at the very beginning of this, was, the toasted barrel bourbon came around. I think the very first one was in like 2014, and Fred said that Woodford kind of followed suit pretty soon after that. What has been going on with the toasted barrel craze in the past year that has seemed to just being blown up everywhere, because you all have multiple expressions of it now?
Yeah, I think it's very exciting to be a part of that. And yes, 2014, it was the toasted barrel bourbon. I think we started out in 14 and 15. Fortunately, we can't do it every year because our whiskeys are allocated. So we have to be very thoughtful in the process. You've now seen the toasted barrel finish, barrel strength rye. And then we also have done the toasted barrel finish original sour mash. And each one's a little different. We use, again, each whiskey's fully aged in that new toasted charred American white oak barrel. Once it's fully aged, we remove it and put it into a new toasted uncharred American white oak barrel. We finish it for a certain amount of time. And again, same things. We're looking for those certain house style in those toasted products. And again, that flavor extraction you get from that toasted barrel, it's amazing. And going back to the barrel strength toasted barrel rye, it's those burnt sugars, those toasted notes, marshmallow, creme brulee-esque, whatever your experience is, but those are some in common notes. The barrels for that, the wood staves were air dried and seasoned for 24 months. We typically air dry and season our wood staves for a minimum of 18 months all the way to 60 months. So that's something that we're very proud of. But there's just the expression that's created when you finish in a toasted barrel. A lot of people, you either like it or don't, but I think it's very rich and flavorful, and they're very popular. So I think other distilleries have seen that, and it's something they're trying to duplicate.
Where did that originally come from, that idea of doing a secondary toast?
So it was a little before my time really at Michter's here. But I know, again, you have Willie Pratt with over 50 years experience in the industry and very familiar with aging, maturation process, and how toasting and charring and all of that affects the whiskey. But, when you're toasting, that's the art of slow heat and time. You've raised the barrel, you set it over an oak pot that's, using oak chips that are on fire, just generating that a lower heat. And over time, that helps break down those inner layers of the wood. And you have different toast profiles, like a lower toast profile can allow more fruitiness, whereas like a heavy toast profile can bring out some real mocha type notes, characteristics. And there's a lot to play with. Our original sour mash, that toasted barrel finish product, we went with a different toast profile than, let's say, the toasted barrel finish rye, because they're two different whiskeys. That original sour mash whiskey is a very elegant whiskey, so we didn't want to overpower it with a higher toast profile. So we went with a little bit of a softer one, a lighter, and I think it complemented. It's about complementing it.
Really cool. So one last question I kind of want to throw at you as we start wrapping this up here. looking forward into this next year, like what is a professional goal that Dan McKee has for 2021?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, Michter's has been very successful thanks to so many people, in the industry. Like I said, the bar, restaurants, store owners, consumers. It's amazing what people are doing and the support for the brand. So, number one professional goal is to continue working with the team, Andrea Wilson, Matt Bell, our distiller, Kyle Lloyd, head of R&D, and so forth, and just continue the success that we're doing now. I mean, it's not necessarily going out. My goal is not to make changes necessarily to Michter's and what can I just necessarily put my mark on. It's about continuing the success, but also as we go, is there different product lines that we can do? Our Shanks and Bomburgers, our legacy brand, we call it, kind of outside that Michter's house style. Those are two fun releases that we kind of play around with. We haven't settled in on a recipe yet. We've used the new toasted charred American white oak barrels and some Chinquapin oak barrels and things like that. It's something to play around with and create very nice, high quality whiskeys. But continuing the success would be my professional or goal for the year, and then working with the team and seeing us grow into the future.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, don't screw up. That's the goal.
No,
Sure.
exactly.
I'm sure that's Joe. That's what Joe would want to hear.
The train is on the tracks moving forward. It is not my job to slow it down. So,
Yep.
Perfect. Well, Dan, I want to say thank you again for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure, again, at first to have you on as first time here being on Bourbon Pursuit, but also to get some more Michter's representation. I know it's one of those brands that people always love to know more about. And they're like, how'd the name come? And like, oh, it's Michael and Peter. Blah, blah, blah. Like there's there's such good history that comes into it. And, you'd even mentioned some of the legacy brands of Shanks and Bomburgers that we didn't even get into. I mean, those are really some historic brands, and really even Michter's itself has a lot of good rooted history. So if you haven't yet, please go and check out our past podcasts that we've had talk about Michter's and Michter's history. And they've also got a lot of great history on the website too. Dan, for anybody that wants to know more about you or follow along or see what you're doing in this year, how can people get in contact with you or follow you?
Of course, there's our Michter's website. It discusses all things Michter's. I also have the Instagram, Michter's Master Distiller, which, forgive me, I'm still learning that whole social media thing there. So I'm kind of old
It's all
school.
about being in front of people now. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, very much
You got to get
so.
out.
You'll be on TikTok soon.
I'll tell you what, that's one of my goals for 2021 is to do better on social media, Instagram. But no, definitely, that's one way. And then also, hopefully here, sometime this year, we really hope that we can start kind of going out and market and everything. And that's the best way. Is I enjoy that so much, that interaction. The team, we're creating something here that's being enjoyed all over the world, and that's the most satisfaction. So that's what I love. And also, I just want to say thank you for letting me be a part of this. It was great talking to you guys, and it's very exciting. I look forward to the future, and whiskey is a very special thing.
I agree. And Kenny, I'll say that, Michter's has a backlog of folks who should be in the Bourbon Hall of Fame. I think Willie Pratt should be in, Pamela Heilmann, definitely Andrea Wilson. And although not affiliated with Dan's Michter's, the last master distiller in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Michter's, Dick Stoll, also, it doesn't, I think you can make a case for him. So I think there's a lot of great talent that's been in the Michter's portfolio, and I'd like to see them get in the Bourbon Hall of Fame in the next, few years, especially Willie. May he rest in peace.
A lot of good pedigree, that's for sure. And I also forgot to mention at the top of this that Dan is also a listener to the podcast, so it's also great to have somebody that is that listens, actually is on it, and is able to kind of share their story. So Dan, thank you once again for coming on. So make sure you follow Dan. You can also follow Bourbon Pursuit wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on all the socials. And with that, we will see you all next week.